Good morning. We continue our review and summary of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We are on page 1425, the bottom of 1425. So we've entered now into, in the bigger plot, a subplot, which is specifically about the relationship between the neshamas, souls, and angels, and malachim. As he began, after explaining at length the avodah of liyachid Shmo Yisbarach, to unite existence with God, God's name, and all the way with God Himself, the highest levels, and that's achieved through neshamas because they're rooted in the highest levels, as he summed up at the top of page 1425. And that's why they're called Ishen Einai. The neshamas are called the pupil of his eye. So he goes back to what he began by comparing it back on page 1408, comparing it to malachim who are also called Einei Hashem. Not Ishen Einai, not the pupil of the eye, Einei Hashem. And he discussed there, if you recall, that there are two types of hashgacha. One is the hashgacha from Shem Elokim, that malachim relate to, that's more in the shtalshalus. They're like the supervisors, the overseers. Think of it, the ministers of the king throughout his kingdom. And the neshamas is primius, from Havaya, primius hashgacha. They are the actual purpose of existence. So that would be like the children of the king. Not as ministers that supervise and manage and govern his world, but rather the actual purpose of it all, which is the neshamas. So now he returns there and says that Yisrael, Ishenenai, even though they're far higher, says Shalamayla Harbim Malachim, or called Eni Hashem, Mekol Mokim Yeshmaila, nevertheless there's a quality and a virtue in the Malachim that neshamas is so received from them. Because as we learned, the neshamas come down below, and though they have innately the higher source from where they originate, but in reality, in this world, they have to struggle. And the neshama struggles. The whole Tanya is based on the battle between Nefesh Elikis and Nefesh Habamis, and everybody needs. You don't even need a source for that. Everyone has it every moment of our lives. We're at battle with our animal soul, with our Yetzer Hara, with the temptations of this material world. So the more help we can get, the better it is. So the Malachim play a critical role in this process, and he explains it with the following. First, he brings, like he usually does, technically the grounding of it in the sources, which I'll go over in a moment. That the Malachim are actually called, essentially, you can call them the processors, like in the human body, the homo mei, that they are referring to the mei, the innards, the intestines, the guts, that digest and process the food. As I explained yesterday in the Berurim, we're going to learn that now inside more in detail. So they are the processors. They're not the food, and they're not the person who's eating the food. That's the neshamas as they do their work in this world. But they are part of the system, call it the cosmic digestive system, if you wish, that processes, breaks down, distributes. If you recall, when he spoke about the malachim back on page 1408 and 1409, he called them shluchei shefa, that they are the messengers, the carriers of the flow. They regulate the flow, they help manage it, and so on. So that's their role, and that role, as we shall learn, they help, a tremendous asset to the neshamas in their avodas habirurim. Now, the sources that he brought began with the pasuk Yakeli Ephraim, Haben Yakeli Ephraim, and Alkein Homu Mei Lo Yirachem Arachmenu. So now I step back a moment and looked at the pasuk again, and also how he's going to explain it soon. So this pasuk is actually part of a whole series there of verses where we're talking about in the book of Yirmiyahu, lamenting what happened to the Yidden, to the Jewish people after they sinned and their iniquities, and how they're sent off to Golus and how they suffer there. And yet they retain, obviously, their relationship with God. So the whole section there refers to that type of dialogue and conversation, how God is saying that I remember my child, even though I see myself suffering for his mistakes and as I said, iniquities. God also invokes that Haben Yaakov Ephraim is actually spoken in a question form about how to so-called console and comfort and empower the neshamas in state of golus. So when you think about it, it relates very much to the neshamas coming down below, and yet Hashem says, "Isn't my most precious son Ephraim?" And as such, the way the verse is interpreted, God agonizes. I think the word is that the Hamu Mei, referring to my innards, agonize or are agitated over my child. Rachem arachmenu, and I have compassion over him. So the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain, and this is based on the Maimer, if you recall, the Maimer Yisei Venu Tavkuf Samach Zayin from the Alter Rebbe. I referred to it earlier when we began learning this topic, back on page 1408. So it's a Maimer of the Alter Rebbe that is then Tzemach Tzedek elaborates upon, and these sections are based on that Maimer. So therefore, you see. So what does it mean that his innards are agitated? What is that referring to? So Meah, he says, Goy Koya Malachim. It's talking about the Malachim. In other words, in order to help the child, God is saying, I have a system in place. So what happens when a child is sick and the digestive system is not working well? Obviously, it's a problem. But by the Malachim who serve the role of making sure that the digestive system is working properly, distribution, the breakdown of the Berurim, Avedis HaBerurim, as we discussed yesterday, that's the role of Malach. And then he goes on to bring other verses to establish that. Me'ai v'krovai, or kirbi. Me'ai v'krovai, no, not kirbi, but me'ai v'krovai. As we said, these are two different terms, whether it's the large intestine or the lower or the small intestine, or it's referring to the guts versus the other parts of the digestive system. And he brings a Zohar that confirms that man karavai ilin sharchiyun, as he brings from the Pardes. So the Rebbe Rashab just brings a whole bunch of sources to establish that Malachim is this level of Me'ai. And as I said, this is the process of the world of Bria, not the world of Atzilus. In Atzilus, it's Kuli Alakus. We learned earlier Atzilus is Achdus. Remember, Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad, everything is divine there. It's when the neshama starts coming down in Bria, and then Yetzirah and Asiyah, that's where you need the processes. So the Malachim, he says, are referring to the Malachim in Bria. So on one hand, it's right after Atzilus, as we discussed, but on the other hand, it's outside of Atzilus. So in the human body, which is reflective of how the cosmos work on the divine level, this is essentially the membrane, the diaphragm, that separates between the lungs and the lower digestive organs. And that is where the Malachim essentially reside. Their job is to make sure that the flow from Atzilus to Bria, and vice versa, from Bria to Atzilus, to both the Amshacha and the Halah of the Aveda, should all be regulated properly and distributed properly, exactly like a healthy digestive system. Okay. As I mentioned, I skipped around. I didn't read all the language because I relied that we can go back to, if anyone is interested in more of the details, go back to where I taught this a few years ago when we first learned it. I'm just focusing on the things that are most relevant to what we need to know. Okay. So we're basically up to Ayin Hu, around 3, 6, 10 lines from the bottom of the page. And he's now going to explain what this is in Avodah. What is this role of this, the Me'ai, Homo Me'ai? What is the role of it? Essentially the role of the angels in this whole processing and distribution and allocation and all that we've been discussing. So he's going to explain it in detail now. So we'll start from Ayin Hu. The line begins at Chochma Bebina. The pages can be found if you want to follow along. AyinBeis.com. So he says, Ayin Hu, the Inyan is like this. Like it says elsewhere, that the entire creation of the higher worlds and the higher chambers. Because in the worlds there are also a thing called heichalis. Heichalis is a lower level. In the worlds themselves, there's heichalis like chambers. That's really where the malachim reside. It's like think of it like the chambers in the cosmic order would be there's the inner sanctum of the palace where the king is, but in different parts of his palace he has different worlds, different levels, and different chambers. And here he's talking outside of Atzilus, the Biyah. So he says bedugmas sir adam. So that's the first and most important thing to establish. The fact that we can talk about digestive organs, the guts, the stomach, and all the details we've been learning. How do we apply that to Ruchnius? So he says because all of Ruchnius is created b'tzir adam. Actually, the human being was created b'tzelem Elokim in the divine image of these worlds. But you could also say the other way around. The worlds are all in the structure of an adam. So when you say, for example, 10 spheres, Chachma Bina Das Moichin, Chagas Nihi Mides, and then Malchus. So this is also within us. We have faculties. So they mirror each other. It's bedugmas sir adam. So just like when we look at a person, from that we can learn how the structure, the cosmic order structure, has been built. So he's going to explain there are two types of organs. There are outer organs, Ivarim Chitzenim of the person. What are they? Yodayim v'Raglayim. Outer meaning they interact with the world, not internal organs that are within the system of the body, but external organs would be Yodayim v'Raglayim, the arms and legs of a person. The arms that he uses to carry things, to reach out, to bring things in and out, and Raglayim as well, to move about, to walk, or other functions that the legs serve. So he said that is the Ivarim Chitzenim. Yashlem Shein Rak Klei Ha'Pa'ula Lavad. Can say, to explain it, he explains that these are only Klei Pa'ula. They're basically functional containers, functional instruments, functional organs. The Mashik Fan Nigma Belev Lasis Leilach Ha'Pa'ula Hi Al Yodan. Because they're not part of the processing. When you're using your arms and legs, you've already determined in your mind and your heart, here he says the heart, you've determined to do something or to go somewhere, but you have to implement it. So they're essentially implemented behavioral functions, essentially. The actual action is through them. But they don't process. They are just really essentially instruments that are informed by the inner faculties. Not that the very entity itself is created by them. That was determined by the person's internal processes. They're just like implementers. Think of it like you said, they're like the messengers. That's the Evarim Chitzenim. So now, corresponding to those Evarim Chitzenim, we have also angels. Like we said, everything is a mirror. Kach, Kain, Yesh Malachim, Hanikroim Yedei Adam. So we have angels that are called Yedei Adam. They're compared to the arms of a person. V'yesh Malachim B'chinis Raglayim. And there are Malachim that are called Raglayim, like we say, V'Raglayim Regel Yeshara. Ukmei Regli Achayis Keneged Kulam. So you're referring to the angels. They're called Ragle because they compared to the outer organs of the human being. Obviously, they're spiritual entities, but they're similar. Their main role is functionality, to implement. I mentioned before, like ministers, the king has the people that implement his will. He decides, he sends out an order, and that order is implemented by these angels. As we know, angels are like shluchim. These angels reside and are involved in the outer dimension of existence, of the worlds. Like Kalim, like from the word Elikim. In the parentheses, he explains a bit more. I'll just go through it very briefly. I don't want to go bogged down with every detail, so I'll just say, he brings Likut Torah that these are the Malachim of Asiyah. So it makes sense, because they're Asiyah, they're Pu'ula alone. They're not processors. They're implementers. They execute. So, Havel Hashem b'nei Elim, v'yeshlem Hashem malachim Hashem rak shluchei hashefa levad. These are the malachim that are just messengers, the carriers of the shefa. Shluchei hashefa. U'kamoy memeged for shemesh. Okay, like the sun, for example, that makes things grow. V'agam shayodam mizgashem hashefa yeser. So even though through them they cause that the flow should become more materialized, more substantial, more defined, because they're actually implementing it. You know, think of it: the decision of the king, for example, to collect taxes from his subjects. That's still all within the internal process. But then the tax collectors are like the shluchei shefa of these malachim. They actually implement it. So obviously, it's a very tangible job. That's much more mizgashem hashefa yeser. This is also regarding the flow of the blessings, that the blessings that come from the higher levels, the malachim make sure that they arrive and they're delivered where they need to be delivered. But it says, but they're not creating. As much as they're bringing it down into a more concrete and tangible form, they're not creators from ayin liyesh. They're just implementers. That's one level of malachim. But we're going to address now a higher level of malachim. V'yesh malachim, now he says, there are other malachim, shenikroim karbayim. They are called the intestines, or the guts. Sheheim b'bchinas primius. They're more involved in the primius. So first of all, where are the guts? They're not outer forces like arms and legs. They're within the human being. So the same thing in Ruchnius, these malachim are more in premium. They're more internal organs, and their function also is more than just delivering or just implementing, as he's going to explain. Shebehem ba, next page, 1426. Hashpa ma'ayin liyeshay de aparsa shaleim. So here, yes, they're also part of the process of creation. Obviously, God is the creator, but they carry that power of creation. De aparsa shaleim, through the parsa that's above them. Parsa, like we learned before, is like the membrane, or the parsa is the partition. So they're like, for example, in Atzilus, is the power of the divine power that is nimshach into Malchus, and Malchus brings it into Biyah with the help of the Malachim to implement. So this isn't just, for example, tax collecting or just carrying a message from God to the people. This is also part of the actual processing of creation, the creation process. Now, obviously, they're again shluchim, they're only messengers, but they're involved with them on a higher level. This would be like the ministers, in the example I'm using, that are more involved with implementing strategy of the king, not just implementing his functional instructions. V'gam shebehem ischalek hashefa. And in addition to that they carry that power of creation. So let's say the king wants to build a new city or a new building in a city. So these malachim are involved in that process. Again, not just action-based, but also more of the deeper function, the deeper the strategy behind it, and so on. And also, mischalek hashefa, the flow. They break it down, they distribute it, like we learned before about the intestine. That's what the digestive system does. V'heina nikraim b'nei elikim. I have to correct myself. I said Elim before. I said Elikim was not Elim is lower level. They are called the Bnei Elikim. And again, in the parentheses, he breaks it down a bit further. I'll just sum it up. Again, I'm not going to read it all because it's very detailed. So he's bringing the Likutei Torah. What Likutei Torah did he bring? Dibra Masu Kaddish Yisrael. Yeah, that's in Pinchas, I think. So he says there, okay, the Yud Kev Elikim Chinas Adibur Shemagal B'Chinas Chachma Bin Yerushalayim. So he connects it to the level of dibur, of speech. So speech is more than just action. When you're talking about the lower level of like your arms and legs, that's action based. But speech is conveying the idea that the teacher or whoever is conveying an idea is going through speech, like we learned earlier, the Oisius Hadibur. Shemagala b'chinas chacham and bina, and that's b'chacham is bariru, kamishlam da'adichom she'protim b'chinas chalkus. Okay. Okay, he explains a little more in detail the process, but basically that this is a higher level of malachim because they're also involved in the actual processing. What he compares it to bina, that breaks down things into details. So before we spoke about that's the midas ha'adam, like in the human being. First, you have a feeling your mind and heart have determined you want to walk somewhere, or you want to use your arms to build something. So the arms and legs just implement. They're not involved in the decision. They're not involved in the method and so on. They just implement. Here, you're talking about a level that's more connected to like bina, like we learned about Oisius. He said that bina is an expression. Bina is part of the process of actually explaining something. It's already details and so on, but it's a higher function. So this would be malachim who are not just action-based malachim, like servants, for example. All they have to do is build. Here, they're also involved in the very process of it all. And now he's going to explain it in the context of digestion itself. Let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything, but it's the middle of the subject, so I would wait till he finishes the whole elaboration on this.
But I just noticed that he talks about oisios in the parentheses. I'm trying to read it myself now, but I'm wondering if there's any shaykhs to what we learned about before with oisios.
Of course there is. That's why I said that. That's what I just said.
I'm sorry. I
must have. The Oisius Hadibur that draws down from the Oisius HaMachshava and so on.
Got it.
It's called Krovayim, not Kirbayim, Krovayim.
Krovayim. Okay. So Krovai and Krovayim. Okay. Ukmoy derech moshel.
Like in this mass, the whole Krovai is Shem Kodshel.
Right. Ukmoy derech moshel, like for example, ba'adam shemakabel chayes ma'amaychel. So he's going back to the discussion. A person, what does he do when he eats? As we discussed yesterday, he is sustained from the food, from the nutrients in that food. Kabel chayes ma'amaychel. How? How does that happen? The food that you're eating, whether it's a piece of bread or another food item. So the process is Aideshem is barer, but bishul hakeva. The food has to be processed in the keva, which is I think keva is the gut. I think that's how you translate keva, if I recall correctly. Is that right? How's keva translated? I'm almost sure it's gut.
I'll check.
Could be stomach even, or
Stomach is beten.
beten.
Stomach. It's translated as. I mean, beten may be the whole organs. Keva may be what's like the inside part of the stomach.
I think beten is the exterior of the stomach.
Yeah, exactly.
The interior.
How's keva translated?
Stomach.
It's the stomach.
Okay. So the inner process is
it?
Okay. So mizbashel. Now the word mizbashel could also mean it means process. Mizbashel also is the word for cooking. So it's processing the food, it's digesting and the whole breakdown of food. Sheyetza hapselas l'chutz. What does the process consist of? It eliminates the waste outward, meaning it expels the waste within the food. And the nutrients, or the primary part that is capable of sustaining the person, is distributed, is channeled into the heart, because the intestines obviously are lower than the heart, in order to become part of the blood of the human being. That's the ultimate goal, what happens with the food? Once it's broken down properly, it'll become part of damu basar kipsare, become part of the blood system, and that's how it's sustained. Because the blood obviously is damu hanefesh, and the blood is feeding off these nutrients from the food. Uminalev yetzi chayes aruchni l'chol evarim, and from the heart, meaning the heart pumping blood, it's not just physical blood; it's also the life force. Damu hanefesh, the life force, the spirit, the chayes aruchni, the spirit, the spiritual, the sustenance. Here, spiritually doesn't mean spiritual necessarily in the conventional sense. It means not chayes gashmi, chayes ruchni. This is now being spread and being distributed to all the evarim, all the organs and limbs of the person. Lefi mizgam v'tchunasam ve'evarim chitzenim ve'evarim pnimim, according to their makeup, their chemistry. Mezeg is like chemistry. Sometimes mezeg avir, you say temperature, but mezeg means their makeup, their particular composition, v'tchunasam, and their personality. Because, for example, the blood of the heart goes to all parts of the body, from the brain to your eyes, to your ears, all the way to the extremities of your toes. Where's that blood coming from? It's coming from the heart. And in each place, the blood is exactly measured to the personality and to the features of that particular part of the body. Whether it's evarim chesenim, outer limbs like your arms and legs, or evarim pnimim, like lungs or other parts of the body. Shari gam hamoyach, also the mind itself, mekabel chayis ma'ameichel. The meichel is not just feeding the lower organs, but the mind itself is also receiving sustenance and vitality from the food. Ukamoy adle achilna b'sari detura, like the Gemara says, till I didn't eat basar of a sheir. Tura is a sheir, a bull, an ox, an animal. I would not. He says, but my mind did not expand. In other words, for a person to their mind should function properly, you can't be fasting. You have to eat. You have to eat proper food that feeds and strengthens the person and feeds and turns into blood that goes to the mind. So the Gemara talks about how food actually is necessary to keep the mind sharp and clear. That's why it also talks about different foods having different effects on the mind. Yeah, obviously, we're talking about healthy food now. Okay. That's the moyach. V'chein ha'evarim ha'chitzenim. And the same with the outer organs. Bekablim chayis ma'meichel. They too receive chayis from the meichel. So bottom line is, when you eat, that food is broken down in the digestive system. It expels the waste. The nutrients are absorbed into the blood that goes to the heart, which in turn distributes that blood through the entire body from head to toe. From the inner organs, the outer organs, everything. That's the process of consuming food and the function it serves in the human being. V'hakol, and all this that we just discussed begins ayideshem izbarer bikeva, that it's refined and processed in the stomach. Va'ela hayeser mufcher, and the most refined part of it elevates shebchinas dakus biyeser lelev ulamayach, the most refined and the most sublime part is directed, elevates into the heart. By elevate, he means even physically, because the heart and the mind are higher than the digestive system. Goes up to the lev, to the heart, ulamayach. Now he's adding another point, and that which is not so refined and not so sublime, nimshach b'evarim chitzenim, is extended and transmit and is drawn into the outer evarim. Now the explanation of that is pretty obvious, but I'll say it anyway. It's like in any given situation, when you're dealing with more subtle and more sublime and more complex entities, You have to make sure that what they're receiving is the most refined part of whatever it is that you're delivering. When you're dealing with Evarim that are more, you can say more crass or more callous even, I don't know if that's the right word. They're more, they're not as refined, so they still need dam. The food still has to be broken down, but the blood is not as critical to be so pure. Like you see, when you do a transfusion that's connected to the heart and to the mind, you see how careful they are to make sure the blood is purified again and again and sterilized in every possible way. That doesn't mean that you can give impure blood, God forbid, to other parts of the body, but it's not as critical. So, for example, if somebody needs, they have, let's say, a cut in their leg, they may not need that same level of refined blood as you would for a more internal organ, especially a more elevated, a more sublime one. But point being is that the blood is distributed according to each level, according to its needs. And it continues with the muscle. It's not finished. Now, before you ate the food, all this didn't happen. So when the food is consumed by the individual, it has the potential for everything we just described. Obviously, you need a digestive system to break it down, which is what he's going to discuss. But it's all begins, it's all nimtza b'tchila b'maychel. Everything was there in the food. So when you look at a piece of bread, even though we may not understand the process, that bread, once it's digested, will turn into blood, ultimately. Or I'll say the nutrients of the food will turn into the blood. But when it's still in the food, before it's been processed and broken down, it's all there, b'li chalkus, without a breakdown. Has not been broken down yet. You haven't eliminated the waste, you haven't extracted the nutrients, you definitely haven't distributed it to each part of the human being, and so on. And there, it's one piece of food. You're not saying, okay, this part of the bread is going to go feed the mind. This part of the bread is going to feed the heart. No, you don't say that. It's one piece of food. You consume it, you digest it, and then the body in its wisdom, the digestive system, in its so-called wisdom, innate wisdom that God created it with, will then in turn do its job, then send it to the heart, which in turn will distribute it to the entire body, each according to its needs. So everything there is all blis chalkus, and there's no yisra ma'ila echad al chavere. Before we spoke about that the outer organs, the inner organs are more sublime, more dak. Here there's no distinction yet when it's still in the food before it's been digested. Shadaloi yukar b'chatichas basar, sheir. He's using the example of meat of a sheir, of an ox, of an animal. You cannot recognize in a piece of meat. He's probably using sheir because he brought before basar tura, which is a sheir. No one can say, this piece of meat, this is the part that's going to so-called strengthen the power, the mind, and this is the power that's going to strengthen the koyach tenua sayad, the movement of your arm, that you'll have more strength to use your arm, to move your arm. At this stage, when it's still a piece of meat, but once it gets refined and broken down, and in the cave on the stomach, I'll call it the digestive system, nasa kol nikr, then you could recognize that. Then this process breaks it all down. You could see umischalik b'chinas hadakus v'agasus. You see how it breaks down between the dakus, the more refined, and the less refined. Shabai, within that food, umechaya levarim, and the way it sustains the different parts, the different organs of the body. That's only after the digestive process has done its job. Why is this so relevant, all these details? So now he's going to say, that's lamata on the human being. Now here's how it is, lamaila in the Seder Shtalshlus and the role of malachim. K'moikein yuvin lamaila, sham shachas chayes alakus, shu b'chinas ein soif mamish, that the transmission of the divine vitality, or divine energy, which on its own is ein sof mamish. Eir ein sof. Just as God is ein sof, the Eir is in its pure, pristine form, it's not broken down into any details. Like we learned when we talked earlier about Yichud. When you're talking to the highest levels, it's all part of the seamless unity of God. God has to envision and desire to have 10 hidden spheres, and then there's a tzimtzum, and then there's a whole system of processes until you actually get to a breakdown of actual spheres, and then machshava and dibur. Here he's not necessarily emphasizing that we're going all the way to the source in Atzmus, because this at the end of the day is food. We're talking here in Seder Shtalshlus. But it's the same idea, that it begins in a state of Ein Sof Mamish. And what does it mean specifically? Remember, Malachim are in Biyah, namely Bria, the highest Malachim. Atzilus u b'chinas Ein Sof l'gaba Biyah. Atzilus is Ein Sof relative to Biyah, v'hu b'chinas Ayin Mamish. And it's a state of Ayin, not Yesh. Bria, you say Bria Yesh, Bria Sayesh. In Atzilus, it's all in a state of Bittul. So relative to higher than Atzilus, there is a structure in Atzilus. But as far as a Yesh goes, that there's an entity and independent identity, no. Atzilus is the divine structure. All the faculties and all the attributes of Atzilus all recognize Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'garmu echad. Even though there are Eris and Kalim, but they're all consumed, they're all completely dedicated, completely reflect, complete channel of godliness. That's Atzilus. But now you need that this divine energy should come into Biyah, which is not Ein Sof, into a world of Gvul, a defined world with structures and so on. So just like the food, before the digestive system takes over, before you consume it, it's one piece of food and you don't see any differences in how it's going to sustain the body and the different organs. Same thing here. To mamshel this chayes alikish b'chein sem sam l'chazik ulekayim neshamas malachim, that it should now strengthen and sustain neshamas, souls, and malachim ub'chinas heicholis hachitzenim, and the outer chambers shehem bali gvul v'tachlis, because we're talking about the neshama coming down below, not remaining in Atzilus. So now we need that divine energy, which on its own is Ein Sof, and we need it to sustain the neshamas malachim and the outer chambers as well of Biyah. They are bali gvul v'tachlis. They are defined and with parameters and limits. So how is that possible? How from Ein Sof, how is it broken down? Because we're talking So that's not possible. We're not talking about kol yochel now. It's not possible in our logic without breaking down first. This hashpah of Ein Sof from Atzilus should be able to be broken down into the kelim, into the containers or the instruments or the structures or the channels. To the kelim that mavarer, that refine and break down, mechalkim, and distinguish or break down into details, and that's the Ivarim HaPnimim. The Ivarim HaPnimim, like in the human being, the intestines or the digestive or the guts, the digestive system that breaks down the food. In Ruchnius, that's the levels that comes after Atzilus, that breaks down and draws down into specifics. The Kelim HaMavarim Mechalkim Shem Ivarim HaPnimim. Dahainu, and who are these that do that? That's the Malachim. Dahainu Malachim HaNikroim Bnei Elikim Shem B'chinas Shluchim HaNesim B'teichem HaShpa'ah Lekis. These are the angels called the children of God, of Elikim, because it's Elikim, Elikus, as it's manifest within existence. They are the Shluchim, the messengers or the ambassadors, HaNesim B'teichem, that carry within them HaShpa'ah Lekis, the divine transmission, Shehi Bli Gvul Ubli Ischalkus Madrega Shenis. On its own, the Hashpa'ah Lekis is infinite, without finite, without parameters, and without distinction of different levels. But the angels, they carry that Hashpa'ah, Elahema HaMavarim Mechalkim L'Kamim Min Madregas, and it's them that they separate. Mavarid also from the word vira, to separate or to divide, to break down, and umechalkim, and well, you could say to separate the mavada, they clarify. You could say clarify or distinguish or refine, and mechalkim and separate lekama minim madregas. That they take that oil and bring it down to many different levels, like we spoke, just exactly what the digestive system does. Ubahabirur, let me see here. Yeah. Yeah, let me stop here, just if anybody wants me to clarify, but it's not finished yet. He wants to add a few more points. But since I read a little while, let me see if anybody wants to clarify anything. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Ubahabirur, and in this process of breaking down, in the birur, mukhrech, you have to say, just like with the food, the bread does no, or let's talk about, let's use this example. The piece of meat is no longer a piece of meat once the digestive system has broken it down. It's now the waste has been expelled, is being expelled. The nutrients are being turned into blood and ultimately will be distributed through the higher bodies. So the same thing, lamaila. In this birur mukhrech, you have to say, sheyishtana muchus hashpa. The very hashpa, its personality has gone through a change. Shetiyeh b'chinas yesh u'b'chinas gvul. Because you can't just take a piece of food and that sustains a person. The way it's made is that the food has to be broken down, has to be refined, needs to go through a whole birur before it turns into the blood that sustains the body and all its different organs and limbs. Same thing here, the hashpa becomes a yesh, because in Atzilus it's still an ayin, bittul. It's still a state of completely alikus. Ubchinas gvul, yesh meaning has substance, and a state of gvul, parameters. B'chdei sheyumshach l'teich chol bali gvul, l'teich, he says. In order for it to be transmitted and be drawn into the inner, teich means not just superficially, but really internalized, integrated. Kol bali gvul, all the entities that are made up of defined parameters, liyas lemozin, that food should serve as its sustenance. Ulechayis mitzumtzum lefi mezag hamshachase, and to a diminished vitality according to the chemistry and the makeup of this hamshacha to that particular part of the body, or in this case, this particular level in the shtalshlus and biyah. So that's why I said earlier the same thing with how it was in the mushal. Now what happens? That it breaks it down into specifics. In the food itself, he said clearly it's achdus. There are no ischalchus. It's one piece of food that's going to sustain the person. Then the digestive system breaks it down, and then the heart distributes it to each part of the body according to its particular needs. The same thing, lamaila, the hashpa goes through a change to become yesh and gvul, and measured and mitzumtzum, diminished and measured according to the personality or the chemistry of hamshacha. V'zehu shenasa idei hamalachim shenikroim karvayim. And this is what is done through the malachim. This is the function of the malachim. Which malachim? The specific malachim that are called the guts or the intestines or the digestive system. B'koyach b'chinas aparsa, with the power of the parsa. Why is that important? Because the parsa is what actually helps the partition, like a curtain, that helps diffuse the Eid Ein Sof of Atzilus. So the parsa is the first thing, it diffuses it, and the malachim now can carry it into all the details of a structure of existence. Similar to what he said before about the diaphragm, there's the parsa that separates between the higher organs, like the lungs and even the heart, and compared to the digestive system. So a parsa that separates, that diminishes the flow, and then the malachim distribute it. And these malachim, the mufcher, the most precious part, the most refined part, and the most the most special, the most precious part, and the yesadak, and the most sublime, or the most refined part, sheba ashpa, in the ashpa, nimshach l'neshamas malachim, is nimshach to the souls and to the angels, hel yenim, the souls and angels above, because they're like the higher organs, like the mind, the heart. Pselis, v'tachlis ha'gasus, and the waist, and the utter crass part, min hashpa elikis, yetsa lechutz. So the hashpa elikis, now that it's gone through a tzimtzum, that waste is expelled outside of the person, just like the waste that is expelled from the foods that we eat. V'hema ha'ayin sodim ha'mashpiyim kol tainuga elam hazeh. And that's the Ayin Sodim that from the Malachim goes to the Ayin Sodim, the 70 ministers, from whom the mashpia all the pleasures of this world. Like we learned, Klippas Nega, the Klippas of this world, they also get their energy. But their energy is more like a shell. It's not direct, like he explains in Tanya. Kedusha gets direct energy from God, from the godliness. Like you're giving a gift to someone. Klippa gets it like you throw it over your back. In this context, through tzimtzumim, and it's expelled outside, so-called, of the tchum of kedusha. So in addition to it moving from Atzilus into Biyah, in Biyah itself, it sustains the higher entities like the souls and the higher souls and the angels, and the chayas, that the so-called waste is what turns into the chayas that sustains the pleasures of this world on their own. You could obviously use these pleasures l'shem shamayim, and then you're elevating them. But initially, all the taivas, like he says, the end of chapter 1 in Tanya, the daled yeseidos haroyim, the 4 negative elements that come from klippas nega, which is, like he said, eish, ruach, anger, jealousy. But there he talks about mayim is the root of all the taivas and pleasures of this world. Here he's just speaking in general terms that the Tainugim of El Mazda come from this waste level. So it is energy. It's not completely gone. And that's what sustains the pleasures of this world, the outer dimension that's outside of the human being, mind you. And that's what the Malachim do. So the Malachim are essentially the cosmic digestive system that breaks down, distributes, allocates the Hashpah Velikus to each part and the department of existence, so to speak. Okay. And that concludes this paragraph.
I'm sorry, can you just quickly tell me what a parsa is? I'm sorry, I have to leave some.
Parsa means a partition.
So when we say like 7 parsas, like a distance measurement, that's different parsa?
Yeah, that's more of a parsa, that's a certain measurement. Parsa here is a word in Hebrew, pareches, like the word partition.
Thank you.
I have a question about this distribution of godly energy that we're talking about here, with that's performed by the Malachim. So material creations, whether they're domim tzomech medaber, they have nefashos that are energized because the Eibishter energized them with the soul directly. It's like a direct connection, if you will. So then the question becomes that the Malachim are not per se, it seems, not giving chayas to nefashos because they're already energized. So
well, why do you say that? Why can't you say the same thing? Everything goes through the Malachim. Also, the energy that's in.
Well, this is my question.
Yeah, but yeah, you can say that easily. Yeah.
And then beyond that, they're also instrumentalities of hashgacha, meaning the Eibishter wants to orchestrate events in the world, and he uses the Malachim to distribute his energy, if you will, so that events occur the way he wants them to. Is that not
that's
correct
another
as well?
story. Right now he's talking about the Malachim that are called Karvayim. There's Malachim that are called Yadayim and Raglayim, and other functions Malachim do. This is not the role of all Malachim. This is specifically the Malachim that are in this category. And
their process is to give chayas, or what like it and
transmit, like exactly like the digestive system. They're not the food. They're the ones that break it down, and like he called Meir, Homo Meir. They are
break
the ones
what
that
down? Alakus?
Hashpah Alakus is the example here of the chayas that comes from food. In the mashal, it's the food that's the source of it, and the digestive system breaks it down. In the nimshal, he said clearly the Hashpah Alakus that initially is Ein Sof and then is broken down in Biyah to each part, to each department, to each area.
Okay, so is this the energizing system? Is this like the power network that energizes the creations? Like in simple Balabatisha terms, what are
It's exactly like the intestines. They take the divine energy and they break it down in a way that could fit accordingly and be commensurate to, measured according to each part of the.
so that energy gets distributed into Kalim, which could be all these different creations. Is that what you're saying?
The malachim are the messengers
Distributors.
that are that step in the process.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question, and if it's too premature, let me know, and obviously we'll hold it for later. When it comes to the context of prayer, obviously Malachim are the ones that say that the Lord will carry a prayer up and all that, but then we're told that the gates of gates are open with deep prayer and ein od as if it was and a deep cry. So that means you're bypassing the system. Is that correct?
We're going to learn about prayer and malachim a little later, so I would wait till we get there.
Okay.
So
remember,
why?
there are many functions of the malachim. There are many functions. I mentioned that they escort us as well, like Shalom Aleichem, the malachim that escorted Yaakov Avinu. Malachim they serve many roles. Here he wants to discuss their role as far as what neshamas benefit from them, because they are the ones that are going to help the neshamas to achieve the birurim. He's far from finished here. And this is going to go, like I mentioned, I think 20 pages at least. Not all about per se about this detail, the digestive system, but the whole picture of the role of malachim. So there's going to be more to come. And if you, as I said, we already learned this once, so you can access it to the earlier recordings where I explained the whole thing, and we'll learn it step by step.
Thank you.
Why does Hashem need malachim? As Hashem is doing it, he's revealing himself less and less and less. This is called malachim, Hashem's revelation.
I mean, you say the same question. Why does Hashem need to say the shtalshlus? Why does he need atzilus and bria, yetzira? Why does he need tzimtzum? Why does he need oyer and kav? You could ask that on everything. He doesn't need anything.
No,
he wants to make it in a way that it should be understood, and we should be able to understand it and be able to retrace the steps. Malachim play a function. Same thing. Why does he need oiros and kalim? Why is your question about malachim more than oiros and kalim?
Okay, this is all the Eibishter. It depends on which level he is being revealed.
I'm saying, why does he need atzilus? I'm asking you a question. Do you understand why he needs atzilus, bri, yitzir, asiya? Why he needs parsoyis? Why he needs oiros and kalim? So whatever answer you give for that, malachim is part of that picture. It's one of the entities God created in Seder Shtalshlus, like ministers of a king. Why does a king need ministers? Why doesn't he just go deliver the message to his people on his own? That's what malachim are. He appoints them and creates them in order to serve that purpose.
A king is having limitations, but Hashem doesn't.
So we know God is kol yachol, but he wanted it to have, not because he needs it. We said 1,000 times. Does he need Erein Sov? Does he need the Tzimtzum? Does he need Atzilus? If you're asking that question, the question is on everything, not just on Malachim. Once you understand that God put all this into place so we can understand, there should be concept of Seichel, and we should understand it. And we should be able to retrace the steps. He could have also created us, I mentioned the other day, why do we need to eat altogether? Why couldn't God create? Just like we breathe, in the breath should come all the sustenance that turns into blood, and we don't have to sit at meals, and you don't have to break anything down, and you don't need a digestive system, and you don't need expelling waste. But this is, we made it in a way that makes sense, that we understand it, and we can retrace the steps, and we understand exactly the details of how Ein Sof turns into Gvul. This is part of the process. So it's part of everything in Seder Shtalshlus. Malachim play a particular function here. Remember, God created the angels. He didn't need to create them. He created them for a reason. So part of the reason is this purpose. It's not like they're hanging around and God is looking, who can I appoint to be the cosmic digestive system? He created them precisely for this reason. And then again, there's different malachim have different functions, different roles. Now, for all practical purposes, right now we're talking about how the malachim are carrying the energy of divine energy into existence. He didn't yet talk about the avodah sa'adam. That he's going to talk about next. Meaning, what's the malachim's role with our avodah? Because at the end of the day, the shamas are doing work in this world. So it's one thing drawing the energy for creation. Like we say, just like God used Oisius Hadibur, malachim are rooted on those Oisius Hadibur, so they carry that energy into existence. And but we're going to soon talk about how it relates to our avodah. We'll get to that in the next classes.
This my question is if malachim regulate ashpo from doing ayin to yesh, they also in this business, so to say, to create yesh me'ayin. Yes, they regulate ashpo from God to us and from us to make yesh into ayin.
We didn't talk yet about the avodah. I just said that the avodah, the second part that you just mentioned, we'll learn soon in the next section.
Like memutze between ayin and yesh in both.
Yeah, I just said this. The second half we did not learn yet. We're going to learn it tomorrow in the next class.
Okay.
We only learned about the first part, the way it comes from above down, not from bottom up.
Yes.
But we're going to learn that. We're going to learn that soon. Okay. So we'll stop here. End of the paragraph, bottom of close to the bottom of page 1426. And good.